Our speaker, Jerome from Washington, is now on a different conference call. He's a very busy person. We'll try to get him back later in the schedule. We will move to the third talk in this session. The speaker will join us in a moment. She is here in the real life, so fewer technical problems. She is a professor at the Universidad Pontificia Camillus, where she is a professor of engineering and mathematical modeling. But don't worry, there's not too much mathematics in the next talk. There's going to be a study of 4 big topics: humanity, technology, ethics, and the future. And Sara might be drawing on some of her past. She has a fascinating past biography before becoming a professor that includes time at Credit Suisse and JP Morgan Chase. She knows a lot, and we're going to hear a lot now. Welcome, Sara Lumbreras. Let's get the slides on the screen, please.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. So, as I was introduced, I'm an engineer, and I'm fascinated by technology. That is what I've devoted my life to. And in particular, it is true that I develop mathematical models. For a living, I do applied artificial intelligence. I do power systems, so many deeply engineering topics. But one of the issues that most deeply fascinates me is ethics of technology. So how we should discern what technological applications are the ones that we should pursue for our own good and the good of humanity, and how we can design our technological strategy so that we can get the best out of what we can obtain with technology. And that is going to be the main focus of my talk. So first, I would like to give you just a very quick perspective of how we can understand the relation between humanity and technology. And as Jose was saying, we humans are animals with technology. Some philosophers have said that human beings can be defined as homo faber, the man that builds. And there are other aspects of being human, of course, not only technology. But there's, like, I think, a very helpful way in which we can understand the relationship between technology and humanity. And that is as understanding technology as the way in which human beings can fight against evil in general. So if we understand our kind as living in nature, nature is a hostile environment by nature, and a lack of resources, like not having enough food, or violence, all those, including disease as well, they can be understood as a threat to our survival. If we think about science, science is the way in which we can understand the threat and anticipate events, and technology would be our way of opposing the threat. So for instance, if we live in a Paleolithic society and we are dependent on whether we can hunt one day or not, then agriculture would be a way of stabilizing our food, our access to food, and trying to diminish the risk of a famine. In the same way, we can understand medicine as the fight of disease. With violence, it's a little bit more difficult because sometimes trying to defend ourselves with violence, we can create more violence. But we should understand that sometimes technology can have some unintended consequences, and we can understand all technology, as I was saying, as a way of opposing a threat to our survival. And there's also, this has been studied, there's a relationship between technological advance and the hostility of the environment measured as the volatility in our conditions. So if you see this chart there is quite interesting. The time is the other way around, by the way. So if you look at the x-axis, the farther away you go is the farther away back in time we go. So at the beginning, the first model is like a hominid, but it's not a human being. Then we have walking on our feet, so bipedal walking. Then we have the creation of tools and so on. And then at the end we have artistic manifestations. So you can see that when we represent the climatic conditions, which are going to have a very big impact on our survival, at the point where the conditions were very stable, the technological advances and biological advances were really slow. And then the more changes there are, the quicker change comes. And there has been many studies about this and the impact, for instance, of cold weather. The colder the weather, the more difficult it was for these societies to survive, and the more advances that they had to develop. In other manifestations, such as art, this could be different. This could be the other way around. So only when we are in a quiet, relaxed condition, we can devote ourselves to the arts. So now, we have said that technology is what saves us from the threat, or our way of overcoming the threats. What is the role of ethics here? So basically, we need to understand that technology is never neutral. It has an impact on ourselves as individuals, but also on society as a whole. And although it can improve our lives, it can also make our lives worse. One example that we are all very used to hearing now is how mobile phones and the constant access to social networks and so on can have an impact on ourselves. One of the main issues that happen here is the damage of our attention capabilities. We know that we humans are by nature not multitaskers. Only 1% of the population can be defined as multitaskers. So actually 99% of people, when we do two things at the same time, even when they are very, very simple, such as, I don't know, grinding coffee and having a conversation, then we tend to do both of them much worse than if we were doing them individually. However, that is not the important thing. The important thing is that the constant distractions, they are already damaging our capacity of attention. And that capacity of attention is something that accumulates damage over time. So if we are not consciously using our devices in a healthy way, we can end up with damaged attention, which mimics the symptoms of ADHD, by the way. Also, we know that having lots of information available online also diminishes our memory. This has been labeled as the Google effect. So if we know that something is available on Google, then we are far less likely to remember it, and our memory is also suffering. This seems like a very superficial thing, because if you can Google the information, why does it matter anyway? But it does matter, because remembering things is the only way that we can use that information for critical thinking and for creative thinking. If I don't know about history, I'm not going to be able to interpret current events from the perspective of history. Even if I can Google that, I need to understand and I need to integrate this knowledge. And the third impact, which is probably one of the most important, is the impact on autonomy. Autonomy in psychological literature, what we informally call free will, or our willpower. We have seen that these distractions not only hinder attention, but they also hinder our ability to do what we want to do, our autonomy. These distractions make us more prone to not take the decisions that we want to. And for instance, stay late at night when we know that we should rest, and not go exercise if we know we should, etc. Technology is also not neutral to society, and even the best technology can have bad consequences on society. One of the main examples that I would give is agriculture. So as we were saying, agriculture is great, obviously. We don't need to depend on hunting. There's far more stability. Only larger settlements could be built when we had agriculture. However, there were also not so nice consequences. And for instance, research has shown that intra-group inequality, the inequality and injustice within a human group, only started with agriculture. Before, you analyze the bones and everyone had kind of the same nutrition. But with agriculture, it is easy to store food, so some people can accumulate, and some other people will not be as nourished as others. And it could be seen that women and children start having like less of a good nutrition than other males when we analyze the bones. We know that since a very long time ago, by the way. Also, in industrialization, we had some trouble, for instance, with the adulteration of foods, which was very prevalent in the Victorian era, for instance. The digital revolution is having all sorts of unwanted consequences. We could, if we want to just mention a couple of them, the commodification of people and relationships. There's been a very recent study on the effects of dating apps in the way that people understand love and their relations to others. And in the same way, we are all the time talking about the post-truth society and the relativization of truth. Obviously, all these are consequences that we need to know and we need to anticipate if we want to get the best of technology. So basically, the ethics of technology is what can help us bridge the gap between what we have now and what we want to have in the future, but being prudent enough to avoid all the undesired consequences that we want to avoid and choosing precisely what we want to design. So basically, what we need to do is, as Jose was talking about the ostrich, not looking at the future. We need to look at the future, and we need to look at the future at the good as well as the bad. And we need to think about what we want rather than leaving it to chance. So humanity needs a strategy, and we need to discern. I will talk a little bit about what kind of discernment we need to do, and some planning. So, just a few examples of what we need to discern. So basically, one very specific thing that sometimes just passes us by is the importance of meaning, of the why. Why do we do something rather than what? Very often, we engineers tend to be focused on what a device does and not on how it's going to be used. And the use is very often what determines whether that technology is humanizing, whether it makes us closer to what we want to be, or dehumanizing. I was giving there 2 examples. The first example is Roomba. It's a vacuum cleaner that you can use at home, and it's quite cool. You don't need to vacuum, and you can use your time for something better. So it's like a really nice example of automation that makes us better people, right? Because we can spend more people with our families, or reading, or doing whatever we want. And then I wanted to put this example of the Roomba device, which is very useful in certain situations. So it's just, I'm not against this device, it's just about the use. So if I use Roomba to have more time to be with my child, with my baby, imagine that I use this Mamaru. This Mamaru is a device that rocks babies and is able to put them to sleep. So you don't need to be like holding the baby until it's asleep. You just put it there and the baby falls asleep. So it depends on what I want to do. If I want to use my time for cleaning, I can give the baby to the Mamaru. But if I'm saying that my values are more consistent with being with my children, then it doesn't make sense for me to use the Mamaru, but it does make sense to use the Roomba. Another example, I don't know if you know this Watson app that can help you build the literature review of a topic. So you give a topic and it summarizes all the literature that has been written about that. That can be very useful for me, but if you get someone who hasn't worked on a topic before, then maybe it's much better to learn how to do a review from the very beginning. Some of the things that we should discern. For instance, with artificial intelligence, we need to be careful with what this artificial intelligence is doing. Very often now we are talking about delegation, about delegating decisions on artificial intelligence. And very often this is not what we want to do. What we want to have are tools that help us take better decisions, faster decisions, but we don't want to delegate. We just want this support. Why am I saying that? We all know about problems such as machine bias. that can arise when we use artificial intelligence. Let me just give you this example in case someone is not familiarized. In these pictures, you can see the result of an artificial intelligence algorithm. In particular, this is a black box algorithm, so it's opaque. We don't know how it takes the decisions. That was built by a company called ProPublica in the United States. And it was used to decide whether a convict will get parole or not. And after using it for a while, because statistically the results were very good, after using it for a while, people realized that actually it was giving far better forecasts of recidivism to non-black people compared to African Americans. And as you can see there in this example, it's quite clear that it doesn't seem right that Robert Cannon is receiving medium risk compared to the other guy, given that it only has one petty theft. So this guy was not allowed parole, but the other guy, who had actually pretty violent crimes, he was granted parole. And this is a mistake of the machine, and this was due to the data that were fed to the algorithm. The algorithm is working okay. It's just that the data that the algorithm was fed had a worse prevalence of recidivism in African Americans. So the algorithm learns that and applies it blindly. So if we don't control for these kind of things, and it's very difficult to control for these kind of things, we might end up having problems. However, this is not to say that we cannot use artificial intelligence. I'm really sorry that this chart is quite small, but I will explain a little bit what I mean. There is another brand of artificial intelligence which we call interpretable machine learning. And with interpretable machine learning, which is now being developed, and there are many people, engineers such as myself, working in these lines, where you can see precisely what the algorithm is doing, and you can check that with your prior conception to check that everything makes sense, so that you don't end up in situations such as the one that I was mentioning on the ProPublica algorithm. Actually, in the chart, you can see like a very, very easy decision tree. So it's just asking yes, no questions. And this is work that I published with my team in 2020 that allowed to forecast what COVID patients were going to need intensive care or not. And it's very small, so you cannot see it, but I can tell you that the first questions are very easy. They just need to do with age and with the respiratory speed. So if there are more than 20 breaths per minute, that signals that there's something wrong, and that is one very important variable. Things like temperature and so on. So it's very easy to make sure that this makes sense with clinical knowledge in this case, or with criminology in the past case, and we can know what we are doing, and we don't let important decisions in the hands of a machine that can be wrong. And it can be wrong because of a human mistake, I insist. But we need to be careful, because all this has very important ethical consequences. Do I have an intensive care bed ready or not? Or do I give parole in an unjust way or not? Also, we need to be careful with what we mean with artificial consciousness, because it is for certain that we already have software that does many amazing things, from composing symphonies to writing jokes or writing academic articles. Those are paintings made by an AI, by the way. However, when we talk about artificial consciousness, we need to be careful about how this artificial consciousness was created. And this is not to say that we will not have artificial consciousness in the future. This is by far the conclusion, but the main idea here is that we need to be careful with what we are looking at and go a little bit beyond appearance. So if we are training, for instance, a chatbot to appear conscious, a chatbot, so a software to have a conversation, to appear conscious, then obviously, because machine learning works, this algorithm is going to end up appearing conscious to our judges. So it's in the same way that I can train a cockatoo, I was putting there. I can train a cockatoo to tell whatever I want to say. So I can train the cockatoo to tell me, I miss you when I come home. However, that doesn't mean that the cockatoo feels that. So even if I train a chatbot to have a conversation with me, and it works because machine learning algorithms works, and we are good engineers, that doesn't mean that whatever the robot is saying is actually felt by the robot. There is no need for a subjective experience. In the same way that the cockatoo can articulate the words really well, but that doesn't mean that it is feeling the words. It's different. And only if we go like one step beyond to what is happening in depth, we can sort these issues. Also, we need to be careful with dividing the mind and the body, because we know that even though we are very much centered on the brain, much of our mental activity happens in the body. It's very important to know that we have three nervous systems. The central nervous system, we have the peripheral nervous system, very important, and we also have the enteric nervous system. By the way, in the enteric nervous system, it's in the intestine, and a human being has the same number of neurons that a cat has in his brain. And 99% of the serotonin of the body, sorry, 90 only, is in the intestines. So imagine this is very important. We also know that problems in the intestine or immune problems can result in mental health problems, such as the latest case that was very much in the press was one guy who had a blood cancer. And he had a transplant from his brother. His brother was schizophrenic. He was cured, but he got schizophrenia shortly after. There are lots of things that we don't understand. But what we do know by now is that not all mind is on the brain. As this phrase is from Sara, we need to get the mind out of our heads. Our body, our whole body is our identity, so we need to protect the whole body and not only the brain. So what we do, those were only examples. So we need to discern and we need to identify the issues. And the good news is that we have identified most of these issues. So we identify them and we work on them to try to avoid the bad consequences and to try to get the best out of the technology. As I was saying, the mobile device, I don't want it to damage my attention, but I do want to use it to connect to people and to get information. That's the thing, and that's why ethics of technology is so important right now. And some of the problems that we have identified, for instance, is the ethics of enhancement. We will be talking about the ethics of enhancement in other presentations in this conference. Also, the access to health is something that should worry us a lot, because we are all the time talking about the debate of the haves versus the have-nots, but it is very important to ask for right now what medicine can offer us, to have it right now, since the beginning, for everyone and as complete as possible. Why don't we have access? In Spain, we have a really good public healthcare system. Why doesn't it cover 23andMe testing, as Jose was saying, for all of us? I did it myself, I paid for it. It was actually pretty cheap. It's like 100 euros, and I can get identified some genes that can cause disease in the future. This should be good for everyone, right? This should be included in public health for everyone. You have there Biome. It's a really interesting company. They don't only use the information about your genome, but also the information about the bacteria that live in your intestine, which we were saying that were really important. And they give you personalized recommendations for your diet. So all this should be included in our public health. And it should be included as soon as possible. Same thing about biohacking. I have there the picture of one device that stimulates the vagus nerve. It's an electrical stimulator of the vagus nerve. This has very good consequences for the immune system, proven in scientific literature, and really easy on our immune system and on conditions such as depression. Actually, it's like a shortcut. The people who meditate a lot, they stimulate their vagus nerve, and this device does that just sitting on a chair. And it's not very expensive. Why isn't this mainstream? It should be mainstream. And also, of course, this is something that we should do now. And at the same time, because we are thinking about the future, we are strategically thinking about the future, we want to debate right now, as publicly as possible, on the ethics of immortality and on the existential risks that come with some of the technologies. What happens if we start manipulating genetically our offspring? What is going to happen? What are the risks? We need to take everything into account and be prudent with our actions actions, knowing that the consequences that they might have are very important. Oh, and also one other thing that I wanted to mention. We should ask for all this to be included in healthcare. Public healthcare in the case of the countries with public healthcare, or private. But also, we should press for having better quality of life. The first enhancements that we can do to our lives are very easy. For instance, having time to relax every day instead of working and just working and just resting. Okay, so we need to create a strategy of technology, and the moment is now. As we were saying, this is a crisis, a multidimensional crisis. Even in the way that we understand knowledge, the way that we understand the human being, the economy, society, everything. So this is the moment to build an alternative that is more positive for everyone. And transhumanism is a very diverse movement. We don't all agree on everything, but we do agree on the optimism. Some people call this the practical optimism, that we can do things that make people better as individuals and as society. I would like to also mention that when we plan about the future, we can take into account these objectives that we come in a very specific way. So I can say that when I plan for the future, for me, what are the important things? And I think that most of us would agree that health is important. Freedom is important, the right to build one's own life. Abundance, equality, inclusion and diversity are values as well. Justice, the connection to others. Nature is a value as well, and many transhumanists put the emphasis here. And authenticity is a value as well. So I was telling about AI. I don't want to have a conversation with my AI that is not really conscious, having an experience that it is when it is not. That wouldn't be authentic. It's like talking to someone who is lying to you, or talking to someone who is not there, or talking to a doll. I don't want to spend my time talking to a doll, right? Okay, so once we know our values, there are things that we can do. And what I wanted to say is that we can create systems in accordance with these values, and those systems can be working in parallel. So for instance, we were talking about Biome. Biome is a private company. So if we think that this research and this service is worth providing, we can have these private companies that provide it, but we can also have a centralized system and institutions that provide the same service. And here I have the picture of Horizon 2020. For the people who are not European, you probably don't know this, but this is like money that the European countries put together, and there is a joint research agenda that is developed. So if the topics are selected for the research agenda, then they will get funding. And also, there are projects that go more into the implementation phases. So we can have systems that go from grassroots up or from the institutions to the bottom. And they are all needed if we want to have the strike, if we want to have a good balance and we want to have solutions that work. So basically, just to summarize, we are now in a moment of crisis, but we can use what we know and we can use our reflection, our understanding of what technology is. And as I was saying, we can see technology very clearly as a way of overcoming our threats. So if we want to be smart about it, let's anticipate the future. And we anticipate the future by discerning the problems. So sometimes things are confusing. So let's try to go a little bit deeper. And that's why philosophy of technology is important. And that's why ethics of technology are important. Some small points that I have mentioned about how to discern were the use of mobile phones and apps, the AI or understanding of the body, artificial consciousness. So we take that and we design systems in parallel according to our values. If we put all this together, there is a new way of understanding the human being. So it's not going to be only the human being, but the human being plus our technology. We are going to understand that this technology is created from our whys, or what we want, meaning and values, and they are going to be the ones putting that towards the future. Because as I was saying, this is the moment to create a strategy, and let's get all the positive that we can and avoid all the unintended consequences that it is possible to avoid. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sara. That was tour de force, lots of topics. We are short of time, but there is chance for one quick question. Who is going to decide the answers to these hard questions? Is it going to be decided in Europe with EU projects? Is it going to be decided by the fast-moving companies in Silicon Valley? Or will the future, the answers to these questions, be sorted out by China or other nations?
So obviously, I don't know what is going on, but the two extremes would be Europe and the conception that we have in Europe, and China, where there is no, or at least it seems like there is no concern about these issues. I have the impression that the correct answer is always in the middle. So as I was saying, there will be an overlap of institutions working with private initiatives. We will have some companies that evolve in a less ethical way, some others will be in a more ethical way. I find it very interesting that we have all this ESG trend of environmental, social and governance aspects of the companies being valued more. This is happening in Europe, but is now very important in the States as well. So probably we will see an evolution, and we will evolve morally as well as in other senses. So this makes sense. I don't know if that is a correct answer for you.
That's a good answer. In the middle, we all have to work together. We all have to bring our different inputs, our different perspectives. It's going to be hard, but we need to do it. Thank you so much, Sara.